The first thing I heard when I opened the front door wasn't music or footsteps. It was my husband's voice, low, calm, and calculating. Once her retirement money hits the account, half of it is legally mine, maybe more if we play it right. I froze with my hand still on the door handle. The cold outside was nothing compared to the chill inside my own home when I heard my husband say those words. What about where you live? What's the temperature like? And if you're curious about my story, keep listening and leave your lucky number as a greeting between us. My name is Leora Kerr. I'm 61 years old. And that morning, I had signed the final papers on a $3.5 million retirement package, the culmination of nearly 30 years of discipline, sacrifice, and loyalty to a company that demanded everything and gave nothing easily. I had come home early to surprise my husband. I pictured his smile when I told him we were finally secure. No more careful conversations, no more waiting, just freedom, just us. He had always said he was proud of me, told people my work ethic inspired him, called my career our achievement. I believed him. The house was quiet, freshly cleaned. Too quiet. I slipped inside without making a sound, my heart suddenly heavy in my chest. Upstairs. His voice continued confident. Practiced. She won't suspect anything, he said. Once the money's there, I file. Timing is everything. My throat tightened. This wasn't panic. This wasn't anger. This was planning. I stood there, in the hallway of the life I thought I had built, realizing that the man who kissed me goodbye every morning had already decided how much of my future he intended to take. Before we continue, I want to clarify something for you. The story you are about to hear is a blend of real-life situations and fictional elements, with artificial intelligence used to deepen the emotional experience and help convey the message. I hope it will touch your hearts. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't confront him. I didn't make a single sound. I closed the door as quietly as I had opened it and walked back to my car. My movements steady, almost mechanical. I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying would have meant surprise, and somehow, deep down, this felt familiar. I drove without a destination, letting the streets blur past until I parked near a small grocery store. I turned off the engine and sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly, deliberately. That was when the memories started lining up. Had there been signs? Of course there had, over the past year. My husband had grown careful in ways that had nothing to do with kindness. He asked questions about my retirement timeline, not with curiosity, but calculation. He talked about what's fair in marriages, about friends who lost everything in divorce, always as an observer, never the beneficiary. He changed his routines, longer phone calls taken outside, passwords added where there had never been any before. When I noticed, he smiled and said I was overthinking, that everyone valued privacy now. I accepted that explanation because it was easier than questioning a man I'd trusted for decades. The warmth hadn't vanished overnight. It thinned. Compliments became strategic. Affection felt timed. Conversations shifted toward logistics. And the cruelest part was, this nothing felt loud enough to accuse, nothing dramatic enough to confront, just enough distance to hide a plan, sitting alone in my car. I realized I hadn't driven away from denial. I turned into a small coffee shop a few blocks away and parked without thinking. It was the kind of place I used to stop at between meetings. Quiet, anonymous, safe. I ordered a black coffee, paid in cash, and chose a corner table facing the window, sitting alone. The shock began to cool into something sharper. I replayed his words again and again, each time slower, more precise. He hadn't sounded surprised. He hadn't sounded hopeful. He sounded informed, confident, certain. That was when the realization landed. He knew about the money. Not guessed. Not assumed. Knew. My retirement package hadn't been announced yet. The paperwork was finalized that morning, but company policy was clear. Details stayed locked inside internal systems until the official release scheduled for the following day. Even I had only received the numbers hours earlier. Behind closed doors, with legal signatures and confidentiality clauses. No spouse briefings, no courtesy calls, no leaks. Yet my husband was already talking about timing, percentages, strategy. I stared into my coffee and felt clarity settle in. This wasn't a sudden betrayal fueled by greed. It was preparation, which meant access, which meant someone, somewhere, had shared information they had no right to share. I thought back to recent conversations. His sudden interest in my benefit structure, casual questions disguised as support, the way he'd asked, just last week, when exactly everything became official. Now, the pieces aligned too cleanly to ignore. I wasn't just dealing with a marriage unraveling. I was facing something coordinated. As I sat there, unseen and unimportant to the rest of the room, I understood this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about control alone. That night, I went home alone. Long after the lights in the house had gone dark, I moved quietly, as if sound itself might betray me, and opened my laptop at the kitchen table where we used to plan vacations and argue about paint colors. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal anymore. I was looking for mechanics. I logged into the company portal using credentials I was still authorized to access. Retirement systems were segmented, audited, monitored. That was the theory. In practice, every system had seams. It took less than 10 minutes to find the first one. My retirement file had been opened twice the previous week. Not by me. Not by payroll. The access timestamp sat there, cold and undeniable. Someone inside had looked. I felt my pulse slow. I traced the activity deeper. Following the internal routing logs, most people never noticed. An email forward flag appeared. Buried in metadata. The recipient address wasn't mine. It belonged to an external domain. That name stopped me. David Mercer, Financial Advisory, Asset Restructuring, Divorce Optimization. I searched my inbox next. There it was, threaded into a harmless-looking chain from Human Resources. Marked confidential, sent at a time I'd been in a meeting. My information, packaged and delivered. This isn't accidental, I said aloud to the empty room. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Calendar overlaps, subtle inquiries logged by HR, notes added to my file that framed my retirement as shared marital planning. Someone had been shaping a narrative before I ever knew a story existed. By midnight, the picture was complete enough to terrify me. This wasn't a failing marriage spiraling out of control. It was a system being bent. Rules weren't broken loudly, they were nudged, timelines adjusted, language softened, just enough to move leverage. I closed my laptop and sat there in the dark. If they were using the system against me, then emotion was a liability. What I needed next wasn't confrontation, it was strategy. I thought of his voice upstairs, calm and certain, and understood how far this had already gone. Someone had promised him outcomes, someone had mapped the process, and somewhere inside that machinery, my silence had been mistaken for weakness. They believed the system would protect them. They believed I wouldn't look back. That assumption would cost them everything. They just didn't know it yet, by morning. The fear had settled into focus. I drove to a law office 30 miles away, far enough that no one would recognize my name. The receptionist didn't ask why I was there. She simply handed me a clipboard and a pen, as if people arrived broken every day. The attorney listened without interrupting. I laid out the overheard call, the coffee shop realization, the access logs, the forwarded email. When I finished, she folded her hands and looked at me carefully. "If you confront him now," she said, "you will lose everything." She didn't soften it. She didn't offer comfort. She offered clarity. She explained how quickly leverage disappears once intentions are revealed, how evidence evaporates, how narratives flip. Emotion, she warned, was the most expensive mistake clients made. Then she outlined the path forward, step by step, like a checklist. Wait, document, secure, move first. We would allow the money to transfer exactly as scheduled. No changes, no alarms. The moment it cleared, It would be placed into a protected structure designed for retirement compensation. Legal, boring, effective. Only after that would we act. I asked what that meant. "It means," she said, "you become the one who files. You choose timing. You choose jurisdiction. You control the story before it controls you." The plan wasn't dramatic. There would be no confrontations, no accusations shouted across rooms. There would be patience, surveillance, silence. I left her office with a thin folder and a heavier spine. Outside. The day looked ordinary, which felt almost insulting. Driving home, I understood the shift that had taken place. This wasn't about saving a marriage. That illusion was already gone. This was about protecting 30 years of work from being turned into someone else's exit strategy. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Warm, familiar, safe. It wasn't. But now, neither was I. And for the first time since signing those papers, I wasn't afraid of what he might do next, because I finally knew exactly what I would do when the moment came. If you agree that staying silent, securing the assets, and striking first was the right move, leave a 1 in the comments because your perspective helps shape how this story is told and what comes next. I became an expert at normal. Each morning, I made coffee, listened to him talk about weather, traffic, and plans that stretched comfortably into a future he believed he controlled. I nodded at the right moments. I smiled when he said we, when he spoke about beaches, cruises, and finally slowing down together, at night. I sat across from him at the dinner table, hearing promises layered with confidence. "We earned this," he said once, reaching for my hand. "After your retirement, we can finally live." I squeezed back, careful not to linger. Nothing about my behavior changed. That was the point. Behind the scenes, everything moved with precision. My attorney documented timelines. Access logs were preserved. A private investigator confirmed patterns I already suspected. Every step was deliberate, invisible, legal, at home. I played my role perfectly. I asked his opinion about travel destinations. I laughed at old stories. I listened while he talked about downsizing and how smart it would be to simplify our assets. Each word confirmed what he thought I didn't know. Some nights, the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. The instinct to confront him flared and faded, over and over. But emotion, I reminded myself, was exactly what this situation demanded I control. He mistook my calm for ignorance. What he didn't see were the safeguards being built quietly around the money he was already dividing in his head. He didn't know the retirement package would never touch a joint account. He didn't know the paperwork was nearly complete. By the time he leaned back on the couch and said, "Everything's falling into place," it was true, just not in the way he imagined. I watched him sleep beside me, breathing evenly, convinced the future belonged to him. I counted days instead, not out of spite, but discipline. Silence was my shield, routine my camouflage. Every ordinary moment bought time, and time, I had learned, was the most powerful leverage of all. He smiled at breakfast, and I smiled back, knowing the story would soon move beyond his control for good. Alone. That morning, the notification arrived without ceremony. I was alone at the kitchen table when my phone vibrated. A single line confirming what 30 years had earned. $3.5 million. The transfer was complete. No confetti, no applause, just numbers settling into place. I didn't react. I checked the time and followed the plan. Within the hour, I was on a secure call with my attorney and the trustee. Documents moved electronically. Signatures applied with calm efficiency. The funds shifted into a protected retirement structure designed for exactly this moment. Legal, ordinary, untouchable, by noon. The money no longer sat anywhere a marriage could reach. There was relief. Yes. But it was quiet. Control has a sound, and it isn't loud. It's the absence of panic. It's knowing the next steps are already done. At home, nothing changed. I folded laundry. I answered a text from my husband asking about dinner. He had no idea the future he was counting had just closed its doors. I reviewed confirmations twice. Account numbers, lock provisions, jurisdiction, everything aligned. The structure was clear. The walls, firm. What I had built over decades now stood on rules instead of trust. Later, he talked about plans again. Once the money's settled, he said, smiling, we can finally relax. I smiled back. He was right about one thing. The money was settled. But it wasn't shared. It wasn't exposed. It wasn't vulnerable. That evening, I took a slow walk around the block, letting the air cool my thoughts. The fear I'd been carrying loosened its grip. For the first time since the door handle froze my hand, I felt steady. The transfer hadn't made me rich. It had made me safe, and safety changed everything. I knew the calm wouldn't last forever, but the foundation was set. When the next move came, it would arrive on my terms, backed by paper, dates, and signatures. I finished my coffee, washed the cup, and waited. Patient, precise, and completely prepared. Nothing about this was luck. It was method, timing, and discipline finally aligned at last now when the moment came. It didn't arrive with drama or raised voices. I filed first. The paperwork was already prepared, reviewed, and waiting. My attorney submitted everything before noon, while my husband was still talking about brunch plans and weekend errands. Timing mattered, and this time, it belonged to me. The filing triggered everything at once. Evidence was attached, not hinted at. Photographs, logs, email headers, hotel receipts, financial timelines. Each piece placed deliberately, like weights added to a scale until balance was no longer possible. The affair was documented clearly. Dates and locations aligned with absences he had explained away. The coordination was worse. Messages showed conversations about percentages, leverage, and patience. Wait until the funds clear. One line read, then move. The privacy violations followed. Access records proved my retirement file had been opened without authorization. Metadata showed it forwarded outside the company. The chain was intact. Names, times, methods. There was no need for confrontation. Courts don't need tears. They need structure. That afternoon, my husband was served at home. I wasn't there. I was sitting calmly in my attorney's office, listening through speakerphone as confusion turned into panic. Questions tumbled over each other. How did she know? What does this mean? Can this be stopped? It couldn't. By filing first. I controlled jurisdiction. I controlled narrative. The protected funds were already locked. The evidence eliminated negotiation fantasies. His strategy collapsed under its own preparation. When I drove home later, the house felt different. Not empty. Finished. He looked at me like a stranger who had rearranged the world while he wasn't paying attention. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The counterstrike wasn't loud. It was final. I understood then that preparation beats impulse every time. Silence had protected me. Documents had defended me. While he waited for a signal to act, the law had already moved. Nothing about this was revenge. It was correction. A system restoring balance where trust had been exploited. And it was only beginning, whether he accepted it or not. Consequences were now unavoidable and permanent for him. When the collapse began, it was quiet. My husband didn't rage or threaten. He panicked. His calls came in bursts: lawyers, advisors, anyone who would answer. His voice cracked when he said my name. Leora, we need to talk. This isn't what you think. It was exactly what I thought. By then, the investigation had already started. The financial advisor he trusted so completely was suddenly unavailable. His office stopped returning calls. A regulatory inquiry had been opened into improper coordination, misuse of confidential data, and advisory misconduct. Paper trails do not disappear when people panic. I watched it unfold from a distance, untouched. My attorney received a call first, then another, then a request for a meeting to discuss resolution. The tone shifted quickly from confidence to concern to fear. We're prepared to cooperate, his lawyer said. We just want this handled discreetly. Discreetly meant surrender. The evidence left no room for theater. The affair was proven. The access violations were documented. The intent to extract my retirement funds was spelled out in writing. No judge needed imagination, only sequence. When my husband finally spoke to me directly, his voice was smaller than I remembered. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he said. "I didn't think you'd go that far either," I replied. The settlement arrived without negotiation. Terms accepted. Conditions signed. Silence followed. No public hearings. No dramatic scenes. Just paperwork confirming what had already been decided. The advisor lost his license pending review. The privacy breach triggered internal consequences, and the man who believed patience belonged only to him learned what happens when timing shifts. There was no victory speech, no satisfaction in watching him unravel, only a steady understanding that systems, once set in motion, do not stop for regret. The collapse wasn't loud. It was procedural. And by the time he realized there were no more moves left, everything he had planned for was already gone. I closed the door on that chapter knowing silence, evidence, and timing had done what confrontation never could, leaving consequences to finish the work without me at last today alone. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.